She said it in a crowded place, like it was nothing. Like the noise around us could swallow the words before they landed. We were standing near the bar, her phone lighting up her face, my hand resting where it always had. She leaned away without looking at me and told a friend that I was exhausting, that I kept asking, that I was always the one who needed it. She laughed, then added that word, convenient, like it explained everything. I didn't answer. I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't touch her again that night. We drove home in the same car. She scrolled. I watched the road. At a light, she sighed and said I shouldn't take things so personally, that she was under pressure, that intimacy felt like another task on her list. I nodded once and kept driving. At home, she went straight to the shower. I stayed in the kitchen, loosened my tie, and watched the steam crawl along the ceiling. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder for a project review the next morning. Her phone buzzed too, somewhere down the hall. She didn't bring it with her. That was new. I slept on my side of the bed, fully dressed, the way I used to during late deadlines. She climbed in later and turned away without noticing. In the morning, she was already gone. A note on the counter asked if I could pick up groceries after work. I left it there. The first hint didn't come from her. It came from Mark, a guy I'd known for years through the gym. We crossed paths in the parking lot one evening, both of us loading bags into our trunks. He mentioned my wife casually, said she seemed busy lately, always squeezing workouts in between meetings. He laughed and added that she was disciplined, always precise about her schedule. He said it like a compliment. The timing was wrong. I nodded, shut my trunk, and drove home the long way. When I walked in, the house was quiet except for the dryer humming in the laundry room. Her shoes were by the door. Her keys weren't. On the kitchen island, her laptop was open to a color-coded operations dashboard, tabs stacked and minimized. Everything looked controlled. Nothing looked personal. She came in later, phone pressed to her ear, voice low and efficient. She didn't look at me when she passed. I stood at the sink rinsing a mug I hadn't used, watching her reflection move through the glass cabinet doors. When she hung up, she said she'd already eaten and went straight to the bedroom. I didn't follow. That night, she stayed up scrolling while I lay still, facing the wall. Her screen kept lighting up, then going dark. She shifted, restless, like something unfinished was waiting for her somewhere else. In the morning, she asked if everything was okay. I said nothing, just grabbed my jacket and left before she finished the sentence. At work, I adjusted my schedule, pushed meetings later, rerouted site visits. By the time I drove home, the groceries were still on the counter where she'd asked me to take care of them. I didn't move them. The evidence didn't arrive all at once. It surfaced quietly, the way structural faults do, spreading under weight. I noticed patterns first. Her workouts moved to odd windows. Her commute stretched longer than traffic could explain. Charges appeared on our joint account that didn't match groceries or work lunches. Nothing dramatic, just consistent. One evening, while she showered, her phone vibrated on the nightstand. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. The screen lit up with a name I recognized from the gym sign-in board. A single-line preview appeared before it dimmed again. No emojis. No affection. Just logistics. That was the part that settled it. Later, I checked the garage camera logs under the excuse of a firmware update. Her car left and returned at times that didn't line up with meetings she'd mentioned in passing. I cross-checked with her shared calendar, the one she'd insisted kept us transparent. The gaps were clean, deliberate. At work, I stayed late without announcing it. I stopped asking when she'd be home. I stopped syncing my day to hers. When I walked through the door at night, she barely looked up, already absorbed in messages she angled away from me. She didn't notice the change in my face. She didn't notice that I no longer waited for her to initiate anything because I wasn't initiating either. The house stayed calm, functional, cold. I moved my pillow to the guest room without comment. In the morning, she stepped into the kitchen, saw the empty space, and paused like she was counting something that no longer added up. She said nothing. Neither did I. I didn't leave the house. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I disappeared inside my own routine. I changed my route to work, stopped coming straight home, parked a few blocks away some evenings, and walked the rest of the way after the lights were already on. I muted notifications that used to pull me back on schedule. I let deadlines stretch into nights without explanation. She noticed the gaps before she noticed me. Messages started coming in later, shorter, edged with irritation. She asked if I was coming home. I didn't answer right away. When I did, it was neutral, practical, like an update sent to the wrong department. At home, I ate alone or not at all. I slept behind a closed door. I kept my jacket in the car so I wouldn't have to go back for it. One night, she was still awake when I came in. She looked up, surprised, like she hadn't expected me to exist past a certain hour. She asked where I'd been. I said work and kept walking. The question followed me down the hall, but I didn't turn around. The next morning, she stood in the doorway of the guest room, scanning the space like she was trying to find proof I hadn't been there. My phone stayed face down on the nightstand. Hers didn't. She started calling instead of texting. I let it ring while I reviewed drawings in a quiet office miles away. When I finally checked the missed calls, there was no panic yet, just confusion. I stayed silent and watched it grow. Mark's routine was easier to read than he thought. Same days, same hours, same casual certainty that nothing ever followed him home. I didn't need to confront him or even acknowledge him. I just paid attention. Engineers are trained for that. You watch systems until they reveal where they're weakest. At work, a compliance review crossed my desk by accident. A subcontractor name jumped out, one I'd heard Mark mention once in passing when he talked too much after a workout. The overlap was small but real. I didn't dig aggressively. I didn't have to. I forwarded a question to the right department, flagged a timing inconsistency, let the process do what it was designed to do. A few days later, Mark stopped showing up at the gym. At home, my wife filled the silence with motion. She cleaned what was already clean. She reorganized cabinets that hadn't changed in years. She mentioned people I didn't ask about and plans that didn't include me. Her phone stayed glued to her hand, her expressions tightening with each unread reply. One evening, she said Mark's name out loud, testing it in the air like it might land somewhere safe. I kept my eyes on my laptop and didn't react. The name fell flat between us and stayed there. Later that night, she paced the hallway while I worked through design revisions, calm and uninterrupted. She stopped outside my door, waited, then walked away when I didn't look up. Whatever structure she'd been leaning on was starting to shift. I didn't push it. I just stayed where I was and let gravity take over. The shift became visible to other people before it became visible to her. At a small family gathering, she moved through the room too quickly, laughing a second too late, checking her phone when no one was speaking to her. Questions landed around her and slid off. Someone mentioned how quiet I'd been lately. Someone else asked if I was traveling again. I stayed near the edge of the room and let her answer for both of us. She didn't do it well. Her sister watched her more closely than usual. A friend from work stopped mid-sentence when my wife glanced down at her phone again, the screen dark this time. There was a pause, just long enough for discomfort to settle. No one said anything sharp. No one needed to. Later, someone joked that she seemed distracted lately, asked if everything was okay at home. The comment wasn't cruel. It was worse than that. It was casual. She smiled, nodded, and looked around for me like I was supposed to fill the gap. I didn't. I was already outside, standing under the porch light, answering a work email I didn't need to answer. On the drive home, she talked more than she had in weeks. About schedules. About stress. About people misunderstanding her. I kept my eyes on the road and didn't respond. At the house, she lingered in the kitchen while I walked past her to the guest room. She stood there alone, surrounded by lights and noise, realizing the silence wasn't coming from the room anymore. It was coming from everyone else. She started reaching out sideways, not to me directly, but to the spaces around me. She asked my assistant at work if I'd changed my hours. She texted a colleague of mine she barely knew, pretending she needed help with a vendor contact. She even mentioned my name to a neighbor one evening, laughing too hard, like she was reminding herself I still existed. Inside the house, she moved closer without touching. She sat on the edge of the guest room doorway once, asking if I was sleeping there because of work stress. I didn't answer. I kept typing, steady, focused, the way I always had when something mattered. She began staying home more. The gym bag stayed by the door. Her phone buzzed less often, then too often, then not at all. When it did, she watched it longer than the screen deserved, like it might change its mind. One night, I came home earlier than usual. She was in the living room, lights low, sitting upright on the couch like she'd been waiting for a sound that never arrived. She looked relieved when she saw me, then immediately guarded, like relief had been a mistake. She followed me into the kitchen, asked if we needed anything from the store. I shook my head. She asked if I was angry. I didn't look at her. Later, from behind the closed door of the guest room, I heard her moving around the bedroom alone. Drawers opening, closing, steps pacing, stopping, starting again. For the first time, the house felt smaller to her than it did to me. She finally stopped circling and stepped directly into my path. It happened in the kitchen, early evening, when the house was too quiet to hide anything. She stood between me and the hallway, arms crossed, posture controlled in the way she used at work when she expected results. She said we needed to talk. I set my bag down and waited. I didn't invite her to sit. I didn't ask what about. She spoke carefully at first, like she was negotiating terms. She mentioned distance. She mentioned stress. She mentioned how I'd changed without explaining why. She asked if I was seeing someone else, the question sharpened by fear more than accusation. I told her no. That was the only word I gave her. The silence that followed made her lose pace. She asked what she'd done wrong. She said she felt like she was living with a stranger. She said she missed how things used to be, how reliable I was, how I always reached for her even when she pulled away. I leaned against the counter and listened without interrupting. When she ran out of air, I said I wasn't asking anymore. Not for time, not for attention, not for anything that felt like a favor. She stared at me like she was waiting for the rest. There wasn't any. She stepped aside slowly, unsure if the conversation had ended or failed. I walked past her, down the hall, and closed the guest room door behind me. For the first time, she understood she wasn't arguing with me. She was standing in front of an exit. Her collapse didn't arrive as a single moment. It came in fragments. Missed calls she didn't return. Meetings she canceled too late. A sudden change in her tone when people asked simple questions. Control slipped quietly, the way it always does when no one is willing to cover for you anymore. Mark didn't come back. Whatever had held him in place vanished without explanation, and with it went the convenient certainty she'd built around him. The gym bag disappeared from the doorway. The phone stayed face down more often than not. When it did light up, her expression tightened, then went blank. At home, she moved like she was visiting a space she no longer owned. She hesitated before entering rooms. She waited for cues that never came. One evening, she sat at the kitchen table long after dinner, staring at a spot where my place used to be, like the furniture had shifted on its own. I was already elsewhere, not physically gone, but operating on a different rhythm. Early mornings, late returns, quiet weekends spent outside the house. I stopped syncing my life to hers completely. She tried once more, not with words, but with memory. Old photos left open on her laptop. A familiar song playing too loudly from the living room. I walked past all of it without slowing down. That was when it hit her. Not anger. Not betrayal. Absence. I wasn't withholding anything from her. I was already gone from the version of life where she still mattered by default. The last moment didn't look dramatic. No raised voices. No packed bags. Just a pause that stretched longer than she could manage. She stood in the doorway one evening, watching me lace my shoes, asking where I was going like the answers still belonged to her. I said I had plans. She followed me to the front door, not touching, not blocking it, just close enough to feel the space where control used to be. She said she felt invisible. She said she didn't know when she lost me. She said she was tired of guessing. I picked up my keys and opened the door. The outside air rushed in, cool and indifferent. She waited for something else. An explanation. A reaction. A crack she could step into. I looked at her then. Calm. Clear. Finished. I told her I hadn't disappeared. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. She didn't answer. She couldn't. The silence landed harder than anything I could have added. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me without checking if she followed. I didn't come home late that night. Or early. Or on time. The house still stood. The marriage still existed on paper. But whatever version of me used to reach first, wait longer, and ask again was gone. And this time, I didn't leave loudly enough for her to chase. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.